Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2500, Chapter 15, Counseling in Clinical Mental Health and Private Practice Settings. So what this chapter is about is to show you all the areas where once you become a, let's say, counseling professional, where you can work. Okay, what are the benefits? What are the cons to it as well, so that you know what your potential opportunities are once you graduate. All right, so let's talk about clinical mental health counseling, principles of psychotherapy, human development, learning theory, group dynamics, and the etiology of mental illness and dysfunctional behavior. So etiology, just to let you guys know, that basically means the root, like what are the causes of mental illness and dysfunctional behavior. So when you work in a clinical mental health counseling location, we are expecting that you would know all these things. And you do, because as you are learning in class, you're being actually taught all these different things, right? Principles of psychotherapy, when you take counseling theories, it talks about that. Human development, that's like lifespan, or counseling 2250, right? And so forth and so on. So none of this stuff should be scary new to you or anything like that. You're actually learning it if you are paying attention in class and doing well in class. You should you should be basically be exposed to all of these as you go through your undergrad as well as your graduate program. So in this field, you're going to also be working about prevention, which is to prevent things from happening, right? Intervention, meaning if there is a bad behavior or an unhealthy behavior, to go into it with your client and to try to stop it, right? Consultation will be, kind of talking to each other and finding out what the right type of guidance would be. And let's talk about in the sense of let's say trying to find work. Your client wants to find work. So you'll be consulting them to decide where to go from here. And of course, treatment which is basically, actually prevent or basically helping them resolve a problem that they have. So when you work in this field, you can work with individuals, families, group, private practice, nonprofit agencies, for-profit agencies, homes, schools, colleges, and the workplace. So let's talk about counseling prevention and intervention. One distinction between counselors and other mental health professionals is that they focus more on the prevention and wellness and less on pathology and diagnosis. So we're talking about when you work in the community and basically anything like that in the school setting and stuff, it's about teaching people from going into those bad behaviors one way or another. So it might be something like, let's say, a young couple who is about to have their first baby, right? And sometimes people don't know how to do proper parenting skills. So we're going to prevent that from happening by teaching the couple, let's say, what to expect, how to address problems if things like that evolve, and stuff like that. So you're again focusing on curative, which is basically, kind of fixing what's going on. Restorative is basically kind of like, let's say, bringing it back to when times were better for that couple or for that individual. And preventative basically mean trying to prevent things from happening. Let's say another thing would be like obesity, right, or diabetes. So we're going to try and prevent that from happening by offering guidance or counseling or whatever it is by eating healthy or exercising, developing a time management type of thing so that the client can work on that and so that they will not, let's say, get diabetes or whatever it is. All right, let's talk about assessment and diagnosis. The Council for the Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs, also known as CACRAP, as an accredited program prepared clinical mental health counselors must also demonstrate a focus on assessment and diagnosis as part of their curricular experience. And that is very true. When you guys go into the graduate program, hopefully you guys do, in this field, you guys will be basically attending a CACREP accredited program. Our master's program is CACREP accredited. And so you will learn about diagnosis, which is about learning about the DSM-5, which we talked about in previous chapters, but you're going to go into it even more, okay? And also assessment. Assessment is basically testing. So it could be something like taking a survey or a questionnaire or an interview, putting multiple of those things together to really understand a person, right? Because you're going to interview them, you're going to have them fill out, let's say, a specific type of form, and then all the stuff, and then we're going to understand who this person is, right? And of course, we want to make sure that all the assessments that you use are considered valid and reliable. I'm sure you've heard of validity and reliability. So you'll be learning about how people create these assessments and how do they test out to make sure that it's trustworthy. Okay. In 1998, ability to diagnose clients was ranked as the second lowest observed skill. Okay. So, and that is for among licensed professional counselors or LPCs and their agencies. So what that basically really means is that many professionals don't feel comfortable diagnosing clients. Okay? And it's kind of scary. The first time that I diagnosed someone, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm in charge of this person's life. And if I put this in here, it's going to be in the records forever, right? And so people do feel nervous. So it might be a little bit about nerves and not necessarily about training, because once you are in the real world and you're dealing with real lives, you start to freak out just a little bit more because you want to do well or do good for people, right? And so then we kind of get really nervous. But some of us actually don't feel prepared enough. So I hope that by talking about it now, and as you get more education, you're going to pay attention to the diagnosis and assessment portion. And of course, more practical practice and training is recommended. So that means when you are doing your internship or whatever, that you take it very seriously. And then you ask them and talk to your, let's say, supervisors about diagnosis. How do they come to, to the diagnosis that they come to when it comes to their clients, all that stuff. You should, as students, as interns, be able to ask them and learn from the professionals who've been doing it for a long time. Research and evaluation. In managed care, professional ability to effectively evaluate their programs and services. So what that basically means is, so when you go into an agency or a place, they are basically running their program in a very specific way. So we need to be able to analyze to see if this procedure that they do or use is effective. Okay, is it really helping the community, let's say, or the school or whatever it is? So learning how to evaluate properly is also a really important part of counseling as well. Strong preparation and the ability to conduct assessments and program evaluation is central to the development of mental health counselor identity. So again, it's important. If you, let's say, write a grant and you get it funded, they're going to go, we just gave you $1 million. How did you spend it? Right? And we need to be able to explain to the people who are giving us $1 million, oh, this is what we did, this is how much we used, this is the results that we got, this is, the community needs this thing, and so we're providing this thing. All those things is part of evaluation, okay? The ability to demonstrate required outcomes to managed care entities and stakeholders, again, like that's what I just talked about. Stakeholders are probably the people who are the clients, but then also the people who are also giving out the money. So all the people whose lives or whose money we are using or helping would be considered important people in the overall grand scheme of things, right? And then provide empirically based services to clients. Empirically based basically means proof, evidence. Okay, so when we talk about, let's say, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, it's popular because there's so much research that's been done on it, right? And so let's say that there's a specific technique or model that was created based on CBT, and let's say 100,000 people have been tested on it and it works, then we would use that as well, because that would be considered empirically based services, because we said that there's all this research that says that it's effective, all these people say it, it's being taught in schools. That means there's proof. If you just make up your own theoretical framework and practices, we don't know if it's going to be effective or not, right? So empirically based ones would be ones that have been researched heavily by the community, by various people, and has been shown to be effective. The ones that are not effective, we learn from that, and then we basically discard that and then proceed in a different way if we're looking for a different technique or something like that. Now let's talk about diversity and advocacy. So advocacy for removing institutional and social barriers that impede access to clients throughout all curriculum standards. So what that basically means is if there is something that's happening in the system or a program and it's actually not doing good for your clients or for the community or the agency, is that you would stand up and speak out on that, right? Just to let people know that you notice something that isn't necessarily going the right way, okay? You don't have to demand or anything like that, but you want to bring it up and say, hey, do you notice that this isn't really working? Like, should we maybe potentially think about a different way to approach this? Is advocating for your clients and for your community, right? That basically means speaking up when you notice that something might not necessarily be right or wrong or whatever. And sometimes when we do that, we realize, oh, you know what? I didn't know about this other component until, your coworkers or your supervisor shares it with you. And then you're like, oh, now I understand why this is working the way it's working or whatever. Okay, so specific training for clinical mental health counselors must also include knowledge and skills related to an understanding of the discrimination, racism, sexism, and oppression on clients. Again, we talk about multicultural competency all the time because America is just full of diverse people. And so that's really, really important for us to be aware of these things. And this is why it's so important when you go to college to network with your classmates, because most likely when you look around, everyone is probably from a different either socioeconomic background, culture, ethnicity, or experience lives, because we have older students or non-traditional students, we have parents who are students, we have, typical traditional students who just graduate from high school and then go to college. There's so much diversity, and we hope that you learn about those things. If you've never had a gay friend, hopefully you'll meet some gay people or anyone from the LGBTQIA population or a veteran population or whatever, and learn a little bit more about it, right? Do you have to agree with everything? No, not necessarily. But it's good to be open-minded and meet people so that your experience is varied, okay? Just like your clients will be. Counselors working in different clinical settings encounter clients from all racial, ethnic, religious, socioeconomic, and sexual orientation backgrounds, just like we just talked about. The counselor's cultural competence has a direct impact on diverse populations, especially while serving as advocates and agents of social change. And that's very true. So one area that I didn't talk about was religion, right? So maybe the agency that you're working with has a common religious affiliation, or they know about this, right? But then they get a client who is from a different one, and so what they're doing isn't necessarily helping them because of the religious aspect, let's say. So to be able to be aware about this other one, right, so that you are respectful and helping them in a beneficial way to that client without ignoring their importance of, let's say, religion. All right, cultural competence, advocacy, and social change. Shifting from awareness to cultural competence, again, goes from self-awareness to counselor acceptance of the individual client. So before, you need to know who you are as a person. That's what self-awareness is all about. And then you're going to be able to then accept the client as them, as an individual client who's unique, right? Family or group as an authority. So you're going to respect that because sometimes in some clients, you'll have a working family that comes along with it. And so to be able to respect how their family works is also going to be important in how to help an individual with their counseling needs. The counselor's recognition of the hierarchy of power and privilege. So obviously, who is the decision maker in the family? You will need to know that because maybe you need to talk to them about helping the specific client. Counselors aware of his or her or their limitations in working with particular client groups, and counselor intentions effort to gain competence in those areas. So if you don't know about this specific area, that you are going to go, hey, you know what? I don't know about this much, but I'm going to go do some research now. I'm going to go learn. I'm going to take a class. I'm going to talk to people who are in that group. I'm going to read more. I'm going to read research. I'm going to do different things so that you can be educated in this area. So the next time you have a client as well, you're going to not feel so incompetent or not aware of what's going on. Now let's talk about cultural competence and cultural humility. So being self-aware enough to understand your own biases and cultural orientation. So that is definitely one of the first things you need to do, is to understand who you are and to understand that the way that you were raised influences sometimes the things that you think about or behave in a specific way, right? And to understand that, and that's it, right? To be able to even acknowledge that you behave a specific way with, let's say, a specific culture or whatever, just to understand that, right? And remind yourself that that's you or your family, not necessarily other people are going to believe the same things. So cultural humility is basically the awareness of what you do not know, okay? Let's say that you are an Asian person and you don't know a lot about people who are Black or African American. And to be able to admit, like, you don't know about certain things. Let's say, an example would be, let's say, wedding traditions. You might not know about Black wedding traditions, okay? And to be able to admit you don't know. And then you're willing to learn, okay? So that's what cultural humility is to be able to acknowledge the fact that, okay, you know what, I actually don't know anything about this. Let me learn about it though. All right, recognizing another person's cultural and values orientation as valid. So even though it's very different than the way you were brought up, that you still respect that this is their culture, this is their values, and that's them, and that's fine. Okay. Ability to employ the individual's cultural orientation as a resource for supporting and fostering healthy development and decision making. Understanding marginalization, which is basically systematic and systemic inequalities. So marginalization is talking about is oppression and discrimination and stuff like that. That is sometimes created a long time ago by the government and stuff like that. Because again, government was ruled by a specific group of people with a very specific idea, right? And the reason why we have courts and Supreme Court justices is we need to challenge some of those things. And I'll give you an example is the right for people who are gay to get married, right? It was considered illegal for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's only been really recent that people change it, hey, back in the olden times, yeah, they thought that that was a mental illness or, whatever, it's illegal. But now we really know that it's not a mental illness. It shouldn't be illegal. So let's challenge it and change it. And that's through systemic change, right? And that's really good. And so now you'll hear a lot talking about racial inequalities like Black Lives Matter. And the reason why that's happening is because people are recognizing that being Black has many types of stigmas put against them. And so they don't get the same types of treatment, fair treatment, let's say equal opportunities for certain things. And counseling training has a Eurocentric orientation. So even when we read through all of our counseling books and stuff like that, you'll notice a lot of the people are basically white or Caucasian or from Europe or have a Western point of view, right? And in the 90s and the 2000s, we really recognize the fact that we're so diverse. And this is why we're emphasizing diversity so much, is because that's the area that still now needs to be fixed. Okay? There are hierarchies of power and privilege that impacts how groups experience the world. White privilege, introduced in 1988 by Peggy McIntosh, is basically defining it as unearned privileges many European Americans experience that result from being identified as white. So here in the image right here, it says, if you don't think white privilege exists, congratulations, you are enjoying the benefits of it. And so again, I want to emphasize that if you are white or Caucasian right now, we are not blaming you specifically for all these problems. And unfortunately, sometimes you'll feel like it's an attack on people who are white. No, the system is what we're talking about, okay? And I'll give you an example. If you are, let's say, a Latinx person, like a person of a Hispanic or Mexican or whatever culture, and let's say you look really white or Caucasian, okay? That person most likely will benefit from not being, like if you are walking around, people might not be scared of you. You're like, oh, it's a white person, even though they're Latinx, right? So again, we're not blaming a person who's white. We're just saying people who have a white look, benefit from society because those are always considered the ideal, right? Light skin, light hair, blue eyes, and stuff like that. And people who are, let's say, darker skin, like people who are Black, Latinx, Native American, even Asian as well, are seen as foreigners or untrustworthy or dangerous, okay? And so again, it's a really complex idea. And unfortunately, we're not sitting in class to talk about it a little more to make sure that I want to make sure that you guys understand what we're talking about and that no one feels like we are bullying anyone else, right? It's about the system, not about a specific person. Although sometimes you'll hear people do that because sometimes the conversation is just not fair and people don't know where everyone is, right? As a teacher, I try to gauge where you guys are so that I can explain it to you guys in a way that makes sense. No one is upset or hurt, right? But to understand how complex, certain ideas are. All right. It is a professional expectation that individual counselors commit to a life of developing cultural competence. So for the rest of your life now, if you are able to learn a little bit every time, every day, every year, that's amazing. Okay. You are now officially a forever student that way. Communicate in a way that is culturally appropriate and in a language clients can understand. So right now in college, you guys are learning a little bit more advanced vocabulary words, right? Like building rapport, and stuff like that. And when you talk to clients, though, you don't talk to them like that. But we need to make sure that you understand more complex vocabulary words so that you understand what's going on a more academic way, a more research-based way, so that then you can apply it to your clients who might not be as educated as you guys are, because you guys are educated. You guys are all in college, and I'm hoping that most of you guys will go get your master's eventually, so that means you're going to be more educated, right? And that's wonderful. But there's also nothing bad or nothing wrong with if you do not choose to go forward, right? Some of us don't like school or whatever, and that's totally fine as well. Consider clients' cultural orientations towards informed consent. So when you guys start off a therapeutic relationship, is to be able to explain all of the informed consent stuff that we talked about in previous chapters in a way that your clients will understand, right? So basic language, not trying to hide anything. You want to build trust with them. Recognize the role of family and support resources that may contribute to healthy development and progress. Understand the limits of the ability to support clients and to be able to identify culturally and contextually relevant supports for the client. So again, to recognize what kind of help that person needs and what are the resources in the community that can help them. Understand that there is a history of cultural bias in diagnosis and treatment of groups. And again, that's partly because a lot of diagnosis information or research was originally conducted with all white people or majority white people or Caucasian people. Okay, so then that means that some of the stuff might not be able to be applied to people of color. And then identify treatments and assessments that are considerate of culture and context. And a lot of the research now usually will require you to do a study on multiple groups of people, okay, not just all white people or whatever. Unless it's specific to a certain population, then yeah, of course you can do that. But you realize that you cannot apply that to a different group. Does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, let's talk about advocacy. Counselors are able to advocate on behalf of their clients or groups because of knowledge and skills. Again, you guys are being educated right now, so this is now going to be part of your skill set. Provide leadership, collaboration, and action to change systems and processes that limit access and opportunities for certain groups. Okay, so when you do see an injustice, is to be able to speak up on it in a polite and professional manner, obviously, right? Obviously, sometimes people are not listening and you're going to want to scream, but you want to approach it in a way where everyone is willing to work on it together, okay? Because sometimes when you scream or yell, people kind of shut down or become defensive. So that's something that you'll learn when it comes to communication styles, right? Goals is to empower the clients and foster change that fulfills the client's needs. The ability to effectively and ethically advocate. Again, that's what we're talking about, effectively advocate, right? Identify the impact of socio-political and economic systems on the identity development of individuals. So be able to understand how this injustice that you notice applies to a group of people, right? And affects them in a negative way. Are self-aware and understanding that their personal identity and professional competence is intervening on behalf of their clients. So because you are educated in this field, your experience in this field, this is the reason why you're able to speak up. And are culturally competent and able to identify the culturally and contextually relevant advocacy strategies. So to be able to understand how to actually effectively change in this environment, right? So is it in an agency? Is it a community thing? What is it to be able to work within those contexts or those situations or environments to become effective? Now let's talk about social change, which is very connected to advocacy. The goal of advocacy is to effect social change in an effort to accomplish social justice for marginalized and oppressed groups in society. And again, I don't know if I already defined this. I don't know if you need the definition. Marginalized is basically kind of like pushed to the margins. The margins are usually the outside, right? Usually when you think of a community, it's in the center. So marginalized means pushed to the outside. Okay, so we're talking about marginalized and oppressed groups in society and be able to help them. Collaborating with clients in ways that empower clients to navigate and manipulate systems for their own welfare or on their own welfare. So being able to teach your clients to be able to use um, advocacy to benefit themselves as well as the other people who are like them. Results in greater access and opportunity for those clients and their communities. Because once you advocate for change and it does change, then you're not going to have to do this over and over and over again for every client that you have. Because if it has now changed in the system, then all the people who are similar will now benefit from it. Okay. Counselor contributes by the use of research and knowledge of resources to inform advocacy, the ability to recognize clients as the authorities in their own lives, and the ability to communicate the needs for change and recommend change to stakeholders and decision makers. So part of this is to be able to understand how the client is thinking about what's going on, but then also to be able to then translate it to all the people who need to understand why we need to talk about this. Okay. All right, now let's talk about the need for community-based mental health counseling. The new Freedom Commission on Mental Health in 2002 was signed by President Bush. It examined barriers such as recommendations for better trained and culturally competent professionals, use evidence-based treatment plans, attention to rural communities. Rural basically means kind of like the suburbs, but further away from like main areas, like maybe the countryside, farmlands, and stuff like that, where they don't have everything in like a 10-minute drive from their homes. Attention to men and suicide, because it's not talked about enough, and better services for children within the community. Okay, so when I read those things, did you feel like you knew what we were talking about? I hope so, because these are terms that you need to know. These are the populations that need help that you should know about and stuff like that. All right, lack of services for children, the elderly, and people with serious mental illness means high unemployment rates for people with mental illness. Okay, so these are areas that if you don't help people like that, right, who have mental illness for the rest of their lives, they're gonna have trouble, and you're gonna be working with them. If we can address all of it at a younger age, let's say, it's going to be helpful for them as we go along. But the services need to be aimed at young children, but also adults and also people who are older, right? Recommendations that Medicare fund to be used to pay for community-based alternative treatments for children, right? To be able to use taxpayer money in a way in the community to help this group. National Institute of Mental Health, also known as NIM, 18% or 43.6 million adults in the US seek out some kind of mental health services. So 43.6 million adults seek out mental health services. That's 18% of our population. Or 4% of that population, or 9.8 million adults, will experience serious mental health or mental illness. So right there it says there's like almost 10 million people who really, really need help and services, right? And so that's a population that we are probably going to end up working with. If not the almost 44 million adults that actually seek out mental health. And we want to make sure that we can help them so that they can help themselves and be successful, and they don't end up being homeless, they don't end up using drugs and become addicted and stuff like that. Now we're going to talk about the different types of places where you can work. The first one we're going to talk about is called the nonprofit agencies. They do not have a goal to make a profit. The goal is to further a specific mission or purpose, and generally receive funding from local, state, and federal governments, individual contributors, corporate foundations, or endowments. So basically what that means is they're going to get money either from taxpayers, right? Or wealthy companies like, let's say, Amazon, if Amazon does that, or rich people in general, like maybe Mark Zuckerberg would do that, right? or grants and stuff like that. So there's two types. There's the public nonprofit, which are usually funded by local, state, and federal governments. So again, taxpayer money. But there's also private nonprofits, which are incorporated under state law and whose purpose is to further a charitable, civic, religious, scientific, or lawful purpose. So with a private nonprofit, what happens is it could be controlled by a family. Okay, so the family has opened this up, so they have more specific ways of controlling the money, but they're also going to be more responsible to show exactly what's going on as well. So you can work in either one. Public nonprofit is probably the most well-known of the nonprofits, the most common ones as well. Churches, homeless shelters, all those things are usually considered public nonprofit. So continuing with the private nonprofit, they function more independently and more autonomously. Autonomously basically means making their own decisions. Again, it's a smaller thing. It's not necessarily addressing to the entire government or a set of stakeholders or anything like that. They do have all that, but it's a little bit less. They have more control. So not bound by institutional policies and restrictions. Counselors in a nonprofit agency often struggle for clear definition between the roles of trained professional counselors. So this is something that's kind of controversial, but you'll see this. If you guys are going to do your internship in a nonprofit agency, some of those places will let you do some counseling, even though you're not fully trained, right? The definition, the roles are a little bit more harder to define because they really do rely on people who are volunteers or people who are learning to become a professional and doing their internship and stuff. So you'll be able to do a lot more in there. And then other places where you cannot do it at all, right? Because they have specific rules that they have to follow. Like a student cannot do this. However, they can do this. They can shadow a person or whatever. Does that make sense? Or they can, let's say, do group counseling, but they have to co-facilitate it with someone who's fully trained. Again, the definitions are a little, it changes in every place, okay? So don't be too black and white when it comes to like strict policies and rules and expectations, because nonprofits will work differently depending on the area. Because let's say we're talking about a rural area where there's not a lot of people, they're going to take whatever they can get, right? All right, and then also the volunteers and the professional counselors in public nonprofit agencies usually have salaries much lower than counselors in other environments. And that's very true because they are dependent on, let's say, specific taxpayer money, so they're not going to have enough to pay you buckets and buckets of cash. However, in a private agency, you will, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Here are examples of community mental health services. It could be a drop-in crisis center, an outpatient substance abuse treatment and support program, day treatment programs for severely and persistently mentally ill individuals, support services for Alzheimer's patients and their caregivers, counseling services aimed towards ethnic and culturally diverse communities, child and family agencies, homeless shelters, anger management groups. Okay, so this is just a list of some. It doesn't mean everything. Okay, so when you guys do internship, think about maybe doing your internship in one of these areas if you're interested. Now let's talk about for-profit mental health care. So the clients will pay a fee for the services, either out of pocket or through insurance. Makes a profit so that the payment structure is going to be different. Freedom to be broad or narrow in services offered at the cost of the client. So in this place, you're going to pay for it yourself. Okay, so that means either out of your own bank account or through your insurance people, right? If you're working and stuff like that. So it's not free services like a nonprofit. Usually you will go in there, you can say, oh, I need help. And then a nonprofit will say, okay, well, we'll help you, right? But for a for-profit, it's going to be $100 an hour, okay? And you will pay it because you want the services from that specific place or whatever, okay? So again, it's very different. It's about making money, right? So the payments are going to be a lot different. Private agencies obviously will deal with individuals, groups, marital or family situations. Programs offered may be tied to other private companies or public institutions, such as Employment Assistance Program or EAP, substance abuse treatment services, general mental health services, and forensic evaluations. Forensic evaluations is basically like court related stuff. Okay, so a private company can be contracted by another company and then they will get paid to do the services. So that's what it's basically saying. The most common type of private agency is a substance abuse treatment. And I'm sure you've seen commercials where like you'll see a substance abuse treatment and they have like this amazing spa, they have a gym, it's right next to the beach, and it has these lovely houses that you can stay in. All that stuff is because it's a private for-profit agency. So they can offer all those things, but the people who go there have to pay for those services, right? Sometimes we'll see that, and then you'll go to a public nonprofit, and it's literally one house with, a small backyard or whatever, and this is where they will get their services. So it's going to look a lot less fancy and pretty and cool than a private one, but you do pay for that private services, right? So for profit was not a key predictor in the number of overall services offered. Pharmacotherapy and case management are provided more often in public nonprofit. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that the services at a private place is better. Okay, it's fancier. That's all. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be more better or more effective. Allows for a narrow area of concern, but there may be a lack of comprehensive services provided, so narrow that they don't focus on the other issues. So the people that they hire are potentially could be also very different as well, right? So maybe they come in, a client comes in for substance abuse problems, right? And all of the people there are, let's say, addiction specialists. However, maybe the client also has other issues like marital or maybe educational things, and those people don't actually know how to help them. Right? So that might be a consideration. We're not saying that everyone is like that, but that is a concern when it comes to private places, is that they're hiring specific types and not more general specialists. Now let's talk about private practice. Private practice may work independently, or you can affiliate with other private practitioners to share administration and supervision services and costs, and may have a part-time or full-time practice. So what private practice basically means is you are going to function and open up your own office, basically. However, you don't have to just do it all by yourself. You and maybe 3 other people might rent a space, and each of those people will have a certain day of the week that you take over or you see your clients. That way you can also help share and pay for the rent of the offices, and maybe you will all 3 of you guys together or 4 of you guys will hire one specific person who's going to do all the billing. Okay, if you do it all by yourself, you're going to have to hire your own billing, you have to pay the entire rent and all that other stuff. So you can see how the cost can get really expensive really fast. And you can also work part-time. So you might be able to work at a nonprofit during the day, and on the weekends, let's say, you can work part-time as in your own office. Okay, and a lot of people are actually doing this online as well. Now that the pandemic is here and stuff, people don't necessarily want to go to an office. Instead, they want to do it on a webcam or on the phone and stuff like that. There are ethical concerns. Not advisable for mental health counselors to go into independent practice without significant postgraduate experience in working with a range of clients and counseling concerns. So we hope that you don't just automatically go open up one without any real experience. A lot of times people will open up a private practice after they've been working in the field for a while, and they kind of get into the groove of what they want to do when they do their own business. Okay. And so that will help, or they might actually work for with let's say a private practice person first. They might be one of the counselors there, and after a while they'll go, okay, now I feel secure and I'm going to open up my own. Okay, usually it's less rare to just open up your own immediately because it's a business. Advantages in establishing a successful private practice is that you will have strong business skills, strong networking skills, and the desire to donate services for the public good, right? Because you're in this field, so most likely you're here to help the community. The benefits of private practice is you're becoming a specialist in an area, provide flexibility, and gain individual recognition for qualities of services. Again, if you own your own business, you can kind of run it anytime you want. You can, not open up at 8 in the morning. You can open up at 12 instead, right? It's your own business, so it's much more flexible. Freedom to use preferred theoretical frameworks at a different speed. So let's say that you are working at a nonprofit agency, and this is how they operate. They might operate under let's say, person-centered. right? And you don't necessarily like person-centered. Maybe you like cognitive behavioral therapy or Gestalt therapy or whatever, but they don't really do that because let's say there's less evidence base and so insurance programs might not take it or whatever. Instead, when you do your own private one, you can say, this is what I do. And if you want to come in here and get my services, you can, and then they'll pay you to do those things. So definitely there's going to be a lot more freedom to do a private one, but there's also a lot more work because you actually have to go find these clients. So like I said in the previous slide, must be able to effectively manage a business. Okay, it is a hustle. Do you know anyone who opened up their own business of any type? Do you know how stressed out they are? Right? They might be talented, they have the good intentions, but running a business is hard. You need to find people who are going to give you money, right? So making a private practice work ethically, legally, and profitably is central to its success. More likely to be successful if eligible for third-party reimbursement, which basically means insurance. If you can have and accept insurance, you're going to get more clients because a lot of people just don't have that extra cash to pay for counseling, right? Usually people are charging $100 an hour, $150 an hour. That's a lot of money for a lot of people, right? Unless you're willing to go less, but that means that you're going to make less money as well. So again, it is a hustle. When it comes to this, you can also open up a private practice or general private practice, marital and family counseling, child and adolescent counseling, treatment of eating disorders, lesbian, gay, bi, and or bisexual and transgender questioning, intersex, asexual clients, LGBTQIA, gerontological counseling, which is about older adults, addictions and substance abuse counseling, and divorce mediation. So these are just a list of some of the things that you can do with a private practice that you could specialize in. Here are some final thoughts on private practice. The owner of the private practice must be comfortable with handling responsibilities by themselves, arranging for and maintaining office space, paying the bills, hiring and supervising any employees, promote their services, communicate with referral sources, consult with other professionals, navigate the maze of insurance and manage healthcare systems, maintaining client records, maintaining or remaining current in the therapeutic practice development, keeping abreast of frequently changing licensing, insurance, and tax regulation. So there's a lot if you want to run your own business, right? And it is very true in this field that is with any field when you open up your own business. Now let's talk about hospitals and healthcare facilities. They usually focus on crisis work, so it means emergency work, right? Preventative counseling, again, trying to help people, let's say, not have high blood pressure or diabetes or whatever. Remediation, which is basically helping them fix what's going on. And supportive counseling with patients, so that means in a hospital setting or with clients, okay? So if the client is part of the hospital already, like as a patient or whatever, to be able to go in there and help them that way. Okay, again, this is just one area that you can also work in as a professional in this field. You help clients identify and change behaviors or patterns of thinking, reduce the complicated thoughts of their medical concerns, and address emotional fears, anxiety, anger, or depression that accompany a medical diagnosis. Here's an example. Let's say that you work at a hospital and there's a client that they just found out that they have HIV. They are going to potentially freak out, right? And so you are there to help them understand what it means to have HIV and what the realistic expectations and results are going to be for the rest of their lives. Okay, does that make sense? I hope you understand that. So in a hospital setting, you are supported by a gigantic organization, right? But you'll also have more emergency related, healthcare related type of stuff usually, but not always. Now let's talk about home-based counseling. And some of you guys are starting to be more and more interested in this area. It's also ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, is kind of related to this whole field. So it's designed to provide services that allow clients to remain with their families. Counselors are going to the client's home. So along with that comes its own set of concerns. Some felt that training programs did not prepare them for the nuances of home-based counseling. Okay, so in our heads, when we think about going to a client's house, we're like, okay, we're going to go to their house and we're going to sit there and we're going to, talk it out or whatever, right? But here's the reality. Some people live in very unkempt homes. Let's say hoarders. Let's say people with lots of roaches. Let's say people with dogs that are running rampant and are not fully trained to be respectful. All those things happen in some people's homes that need help, right? Sometimes it's very scary, okay? So some agencies will actually make two people go. So there's a little bit more of a safety issue, okay? Counseling for children is not the same as counseling for adults if you're going to work with children, because the communication styles are going to be different. Children don't have the same vocabulary words that an adult does, right? They are not able to talk and express themselves in a complex way that an adult can. So those are things that I hope you seek out when you guys are doing your educational purpose, and say, hey, can I hear about people's approaches or experiences when they went to people's homes? Okay, and you will learn there's some really scary stuff and funny stuff, but there could be a bunch of varieties of stuff. And I've heard scary stories, but I've also heard really great stories as well. Okay, so it really depends on the population that you work with, obviously. All right, benefits. Counselors are able to observe family dynamics, communication, and problem solving. So let's say that you had a client who had a problem, right? When they come to you to your office, you don't really get to see how their whole life is in reality when it's working. But when you go to their homes, you can see how the mom is yelling at the individual all the time and causing stress. You're like, oh, I see what's going on. Or maybe, let's say the father has an addiction issue. Oh, this is another thing we need to deal with or work with, with the client to be able to come to a resolution. Okay. To use this to develop contextually relevant therapeutic strategies, see the family system, and some clients who are distrustful of counselors are more comfortable participating in counseling in their own environment. So some people are very nervous. They don't like an office environment. So going to their home helps them because they're a little bit more comfortable and they have less anxiety or nervousness, right? The challenges is to maintain confidentiality, because if the whole family is there, everyone hears it. So there might be no privacy in that way. And to limit distractions. Maybe the phone rings. Maybe someone's doing the dishes. Someone is watching television. It can be very distracting that way. Concerns for the counselor's safety. Again, that is a serious and real thing. Although usually you're safe, right? But there's always a possibility, and we need to not ignore that possibility. Boundaries are not as clear if, and in an office environment, the client's asking to borrow money and personal questions happens at the home because they're like, hey, blah, blah, blah. Or they might say, oh, is there any way that I can borrow $20 or whatever from you before you leave? And that's very uncomfortable because they feel so comfortable around you in their home that they do things like that. And let's talk about geriatric counseling, which is older adults. Fastest growing segment of our population and most underserved. So if you're interested in making money or guaranteed to have a job, geriatric counseling might be the area that you want to focus in. I actually know someone who is in this area and they love it because it's about people who have experienced life, and now they are coming to some problems, but they're also experienced with life, so they're not questioning or wondering things. They're just dealing with certain type of stuff. Professionals also do not get enough training in this population, and it's true because we kind of don't pay attention to the unglamorous part, people who are older, right? And so we don't necessarily know what those problems are that they're going to get. Do you know a lot about retirement problems? Probably not, because you're not surrounded by those people all the time. So to be able to now focus on it and ask people questions about that, to learn about what it means to be older, to know what it means to lose a loved one, let's say a spouse, a partner, or something like that. Those are things that you now need to know if you want to work with this field, right? Or this area, or acquiring a disability at an older age. So the person has been, like, let's say, running and doing a lot of exercise for their entire lives until they're older. Now they can't do it because of a hip or a knee issue or whatever. How to talk to them about that? Because you can't say, oh, it'll be okay, it's going to heal, because it might not, right? So it's going to be a different context. Common concerns in this field are chronic illness, which is basically illnesses that are going to be there for the rest of your life. So that might be arthritis. It might be Alzheimer's. It might be, all those other types of illnesses. Physical ability, crises, so emergencies. Transitioning out of work can be very stressful. That's why you see some older people who don't want to quit. They want to work all the time because they're going to feel useless. Okay. Financial crises. So do they have enough money to survive? Family crises. So what happens when their family no longer wants to talk to them or they move away because they have their own lives? How does that deal with their loneliness or their depression, their whatever it is? Grief. What happens when your partner or spouse dies or their best friend dies? To be able to see all of your friends to slowly die or not to be able to see them because they are no longer able to walk or whatever can be very stressful for some people. And of course, the changing relationships as we have talked about before.